Today I'm going to be adding in the features to my blocked in proportions from yesterday. I'm going to start with the eyes, just because that's always the most interesting thing for me to draw. When you do this on your own drawing, pay very close attention to your eye shape. Look at how the subtle curves move in and out for your eye. How wide is the opening of your eye and the curve of your upper and lower eyelid. I have really wide open eyes, so I notice that the outer edge of my eye is not really a point. It's actually quite rounded. And the lower eyelid shape is very soft and subtle, much more subtle than the top eyelid shape. Now I'm going to add in the shape of the iris and the pupil. Remember, those should both be a perfect circle, and the iris should go underneath the top eyelid, which covers up a little bit of it. And depending on the person, it either comes very close down to the bottom eyelid, or sometimes it goes underneath it as well. The pupil should be a perfect circle right in the center of your iris. Then you can add in the inner tear duct in the inside corner of your eye. A common mistake that I see students make is that they draw the iris too far up underneath the upper eyelid. But if it looks much better if you pull it down where it's just underlapping a tiny amount, like in the example there. Now once I have this, I've added in the tear duct and I'm adding the upper eyelid crease, and I'm going to begin working on, in just a moment, matching up and making the next eye symmetrical to it. And that takes just a little bit of practice. Don't get frustrated with this part of the drawing. Take your time and really look at yourself in the mirror and really ask yourself, what are the shapes and the contours and the edges of the features on your face? You should be looking back and forth in your mirror really frequently. Every 2 or 3 seconds is ideal. A lot of times beginner students also like to just draw without looking in the mirror, and they think, oh, I know what I look like, but it's not going to end up really having a good likeness to you. So go very slow and be meticulous with this part. A well-drawn portrait takes time, and it takes some investigation into really looking at your reflection. Another really important thing to keep in mind is all of this should be drawn very lightly. It won't probably be perfect and the exact mark that you want to make that very first time you draw it. So if it's light, even much later on into the drawing, you can still make adjustments. Notice I'm always sort of scooching and adjusting subtle details. Now in this next section, I'm going to add in the eyebrows, and I'm going to look at the narrow taper of the bridge of my nose right in between my eyes, and then I follow that shadow up into my brow bone structure. And I'm just going to block those in very lightly. I'll do more detail on those later, but just to get the general shape. Now once I've finished those eyebrows, and before I move into the nose and the mouth, I want to give you one additional piece of information. So if this is true for you, this is something you could incorporate into your own drawing. So here it is. I do teach my students to take the whole head and divide it in half for the eyes. Take this bottom half and divide it in half for the nose. Take this bottom fourth and divide it in half for the bottom of the lips. I think that just makes things really simple, especially when you're starting to learn. However, I do want you to know that there is some variation amongst people's basic anatomy. I've measured out in this photographic example of this man. If I measure from his eyes to his chin, it is the same as from his eyes to the top of his head. There's a little bit of extra height here given the volume of his hair, but the half line is always true to the middle of the eyes. However, I have measured from my half to the bottom of the chin and divided it in half, and that leaves me with here. And notice that his nose is actually a little bit higher than that. And that's okay, sometimes that happens. When I take this bottom 1/4 and divide it in half for the 1/8 line, this is where the bottom of the lips would be according to those measurements. But notice that his lips are a little bit higher than that. So the measurements that I'm giving you, those are just basic measurements. I do know from looking at myself, my nose does not come all the way down to this 1/4 line. The bottom of my nose would actually be about here. And the same thing with my lips. The bottom of my lips would be a little bit higher. So now in this current drawing, I'm gonna move that 1/4 line up just a little bit, just because I have measured it on myself and I know that my nose is a little bit higher. If this is true for yours, you can do the same thing. So I'm gonna start off with that 3-circle technique, kind of looking at the structure of my nose. That first time I thought it was a little bit too low. I think my center circle should be a little higher and my 2 outer circles a little bit lower, just based on the perspective that I'm seeing today with the angle that I'm looking into the mirror. Once I have that basic structure, I'm going to go in and start adding in some details, looking really carefully at the shape of the outer nostril. That's really the only hard lines that you're going to see distinctly on your nose. Everything else will be much more subtle and softer shading. The shapes of my nostrils, they're a little bit pointy at the top, but still very, very flat and foreshortened. Erasing that underdrawing of those circles really starts to make that nose look more 3-dimensional. Once I add shading to this later, that's really going to pull out the 3-dimensional characteristics of that nose. So as soon as I finish looking at the nose area, I'm going to move down into the mouth. I noticed that with my mouth, it is a little bit higher than that 1/8 line, so I'm going to move that marker up and figure out exactly how that shape fits in there. I'm going to start with that little upper indentation right above my lips, in between my nose and my lips, that little shaded area. That kind of helps me frame in where the Cupid's bow, the 2 points at the top of my upper lip, should go. So I'm just using some circles to help me figure out the shape and the fullness of my lips and their relationship with the top lip to the bottom lip. And then really paying attention to the shape of the opening, the center crease of your lips is really important. As I move through, I'm just looking at that outer edge. This should be very, very soft. There's never a hard, defined edge against your lips unless you're wearing lip liner or something like that. The only part of your lip that will be really dark is that center crease line where your lips part. That causes a really nice deep shadow in between your lips. Then as I get finished, I'm going to erase those beginning circles, make any final adjustments and tweaks, and then I like to add in the little shadow that falls right underneath your lower lip as it moves into your chin area. Now's a really good time to start thinking about the structure of your face shape. I'm going to start at the temple and figure out more specifically than a basic egg shape. There tends to be an indentation right by your temple, and then it juts out just a little bit for your cheekbone structure. And then depending on your jaw shape, it could be very square or it could be very angular. Looking in the mirror is going to be a really, really important thing for you to do for this step to make it look like you. Everybody's face shape is very, very different. My chin tends to have a little bit of an indentation in the center, and then I've got a narrow chin and a very angular, narrow jaw. So looking and adjusting in this part, 1/16 of an inch difference in that shape and in that line and edge can make a huge difference. Now as I go back up to the top, I'm going to frame in my hairline with some really soft, delicate marks. I have a widow's peak where it points down in the center, and then seeing how that hairline flows down into the side of my face is going to be really important. So now as I'm looking at my face structure now, I realize that where the hair comes down beside my face, I can see my ears. And since I moved my nose level up a smidge, I should also move my ear up. And now I'm looking more specifically at my ear shape. Do I have attached earlobes? How much of it do I see? Is it more vertical, more angled? Blocking that shape in can really help start to be more specific than just that generic ear shape. Now as I start to figure out my part and the other right side of my face, I'm going to be making really soft, delicate hairs along, framing in my hairline. Don't let that edge be very harsh and solid. It's made up of hundreds and thousands of little tiny delicate hairs, so make it look that way with your mark making. So now I'm just going to add some more detail. I'm going to add the upper shape of my hair, the way it falls around my skull at the side of my head. and figuring out how that hair flows down and continues to frame my face. Now there are a ton of great examples online, pictures, tutorials, videos that you can look at that will help you see how to draw your hair shape. Everybody's is different, but there are some really good tutorials that I'll be sharing with you to show you how to do that. Finding some volume at the top of your head is important as well. The egghead shape that we've drawn is just the top of your skull. So depending on your hair, you may need to move your hair up a little bit beyond that. And you can see that I've done that there where I have a part where that hair has a little bit of volume to it. And I'm just going to continue blocking in, looking at the shape and the flow of my hair. What do I see? What direction is it going in? How does that hair start to fall over my shoulder? All of that sort of good stuff. Now, as I'm blocking in some of this hair, I am keeping in mind that I'm going to keep this very light because it's going to change the next time I sit down to continue working on this drawing. Right now, it happens to be covering up part of the side of my face right through there, a little section of my jawline. I can't see the ear on that right-hand side. This lets me go through and finish out that chin and jawline structure. And now I'm just going to add in really loosely some soft marks indicating the direction that my hair is flowing, just to help it start to feel like it's got some texture. Notice for right now, I'm not really worried about value or anything like that. We're going to be adding shading to this tomorrow. But for now, just looking at that structure, how does the hair come up and out of my skull? How does it flow? I have a lot of cowlicks, so I'm going to try to indicate those. Once I'm finished, I can erase all of those extra grid lines that we used initially in the drawing to block out the face. That's why we wanted those to be so light. That way we can easily erase them and have them not be visible anymore. One last piece of advice I want to give you as you're working on this drawing today is take your time and be really patient with yourself. Try not to let yourself get discouraged or upset or give up on any part of this drawing. The important part of being an artist is being able to try and try and try again. Keep adjusting and keep doing your best. That's all that I can really ask for. And at the end of the day, that's something that you can be really proud of. So good luck.